You probably wouldn't think about wearing a tuxedo while washing pots and pans. Or wear a wedding gown to weed the garden. Or go swimming in a football uniform. Welders don't weld wearing a tutu.
Play ball.
And catchers on baseball teams don't catch in their birthday suits. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to know that clothing ought to suit the occasion, and that proper protective gear can take a good deal of the sting out of nearly any curve that life can toss you. But you would be amazed at how many firefighters answer the call with an attitude that says, it's no big deal. It's just a routine call. Well, if you remember nothing else from this tape, remember this. There's no such thing as a routine call. For the next 15 minutes or so, we will reintroduce you to the importance of proper protective clothing and equipment, what to look for in it, how to use it properly, and how to maintain it. We're going to stress that you've got to wear it all the time so that it can help save your life and limb. But before you have a chance to decide that you know all about protective gear, I want to introduce you to Steve Schuman, a well-trained and conscientious firefighter who was severely burned in a fire that he thought was routine. Steve Schuman joined the fire service at the age of 18 and has been with the Wantagh Fire Department for more than 20 years. Like his father before him, Steve was named to serve as chief of the department, and he's been in that position since 1993. But all life changed dramatically in what Steve thought to be a routine fire.
We had a report of a house fire about 5:30 in the afternoon in the north end of our district. And when I got out of my car, I saw a fire coming from the left side, number 2 side of the house. And I went back to my car and transmitted a working fire on the radio. At that point, I started putting my gear on, putting on my bunker gear, mask, I had a portable radio, gloves, helmet, and an elderly man came up to me and said that there might be 3 or 4 kids still in the house. Put on my mask, put on my gloves, full turnout gear. 100%. I did a search, primary search of the first floor, radioed back to the next chief that was arriving on scene, told him that the primary search of the first floor was negative, that there was no one in the house. I went back out of the house, came out, took my face piece off, spoke to the officer, and told him what we had with the intention of going back into the house to search the second floor. I had my mask on, my helmet, my turnout coat, bunker pants, bunker boots, and gloves. And I was crawling along the hallway that separates the garage and the house to reach the front of the nozzle man, basically just to tap and let him know that I was going back up to do my search with the truck company crew, which was also arriving at that time. And just as the point where I got to the front of the nozzle and tapped him, the fire flashed over on us. The flashover had knocked me over. We read about it. We saw, films on it, and there's a lot of people that tell you they lived through it. When they've been in flashovers before. There's no way to describe it. The fire went from floor to ceiling instantly. There was no buildup of heat that we felt. It was an instant flash. The fire went from floor to ceiling. At that point, I got up, back onto my knees, turned in the direction that I thought was the way I came in to try to exit the building. When I turned, I hit a wall. When I turned again, about 90 degrees, felt it was very hot and I was burning, but I felt I could still get out of that structure. And I hit another wall. I turned 90 degrees again, I hit another wall. At that point, I knew I was in big trouble. The heat was incredible. My hands were burning. As I was trying to crawl in the only direction that was free, my mask got hung up. I turned around and tried to release the mask from the obstruction, and I couldn't. It was just too hard. I tried to do a quick release on it. I took the tank off my back, turned around, tried to release the tank from the obstruction. I couldn't. At that point, the facepiece was still on me, but it was basically sit there and burn or remove it and try to scramble out of the building, and that's what I did. At that point, I had no alternative, but I took the facepiece off and crawled to the rear end of the garage. I crawled about 15 feet, and where I was met by another firefighter who pulled me the rest of the way out.
Here are some interesting statistics about the fire. It was extinguished with about 100 gallons of water, with an 1 3/4 line. It was basically a room and contents call. No big deal. And we're not talking about a whole lot of time either. In fact, from the time the alarm went off to the time the helicopter was called in response to Steve's injuries was merely 11 minutes. A very short 11 minutes. That includes Steve's response time, his gearing up, his primary search, coming out of the building, speaking to other units, going back in, the flashover occurring, being removed, being treated in the yard, and the copter being called. 11 minutes is not a long time, but those 11 minutes changed Steve's life forever.
I was taken to Nassau County Medical Center burn unit. I was admitted for 66 days. I was in the burn unit. And the end result was I had 35% third-degree burns, my total body surface area. The burns were located on my face, my scalp, sides of my head, my hands, my arms, under my armpits, and a small burn on my stomach. I didn't have any burns below the waist due to the fact that I was wearing the bunker pants. My hands were the most severely burned, third degree. They even called it fourth degree. That's tissue that's basically dead. It's not able to be repaired at all. I lost the tips of all my fingers, and my degree of mobility in the hands is greatly reduced. I wear bandages on it really just for function, to be able to grab the doorknob a little bit better, make things a little bit easier for me.
Unfortunately, Steve Shulman's story is not an isolated case. In fact, nearly 100,000 firefighters are injured each year, and about 100 each year lose their lives in the line of duty. Smoke inhalation, severe burns, and trauma are among the leading causes. And many of those injuries occur in situations that turned out to be anything but routine. It's difficult to say how many injuries or deaths could have been prevented, but here's something that is easy to say. The chances of surviving and of avoiding injury are certainly better when you respond to a call wearing the right gear. That's something you can bet your life on. Here's a phrase to live by. There's no such thing as a routine fire, so always wear the right gear and wear that right gear right. Pretty simple, huh? But wearing the right gear and wearing it right involves three different considerations: what we should wear, how we should use it, and how it's to be maintained. And you have to tend to all three or you could get burned. Believe anything else, and you could be dead wrong.
Firefighters can be very stubborn at times. They think that it can't happen to them, and I'm living proof it does happen to you.
Let's start with what we should be wearing. What exactly is the right gear? When fighting structural fires, the National Fire Protection Association says that there are 7 key elements that are necessary for personal protection: a protective coat and pants, a protective hood, helmet, gloves and footwear, a self-contained breathing apparatus, and a personal alert safety system device, commonly called a PASS device. It's important to make sure that your clothing and equipment meet both NFPA standards and your own department's requirements. The NFPA standards are thorough and specify minimum requirements for all protective gear. That covers things such as design, materials, construction, performance testing, labeling, reflectivity, resistance to burning, to moisture, to shrinkage, to tearing and seam breaking, and a host of other characteristics. But keep this in mind. The NFPA standards are minimums. It's clearly worth the time and effort to become an expert on what's actually available. Like new liner systems that don't absorb water, dry quickly, and have moisture barriers oriented between the thermal barrier and the body. Think of it this way. That extra measure of protection could just be the difference between being a survivor or being a statistic.
The National Fire Protection Agency sets standards for the gear, which changes periodically. There's votes to upgrade different materials, different thermal ratings of gear, different types of liners. So even at the minimum, the gear that we purchase today is good protective gear, even at the minimum. If we go over and above that, that's better protection for the firefighter. A department that's looking to purchase gear should purchase the best available for the firefighter.
To be honest, knowing what is the best available can be a little tricky. Every manufacturer is going to claim that their product is better than the next guy's. That's why you got to do some research. For instance, protective hoods come in a variety of styles and material construction. And some of the newer models offer improved ventilation and a more effective dissipation of body heat through the crown of the head. Check them out. Reduced body heat can help lower the overall level of stress on the firefighter. And how about helmets? Make sure your helmet meets NFPA Standard 1971 and has been independently tested and certified for use in environments up to at least 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Your helmet ought to have a full face shield and high heat chin strap. In addition, there are models available now with PBI ear flaps and made with materials designed to block pathogens that are transmitted by blood. Those additional levels of protection should be seriously considered. The protective gloves you select should work in concert with your other outer garments. The sleeve of your coat and the end of the glove should overlap by several inches. There shouldn't be any gapping. You'll find that manufacturers produce a variety of wristlet options to help prevent exposure and potential burn situations. And we should state this in the very strongest terms. Make sure your gloves meet the NFPA requirement to resist bloodborne pathogens and other liquid transfers. It's one of your best defenses against burns and the risk of infection through incidental contact with dangerous viruses like HIV. When we talk about protection from head to toe, we mean just that. And one of the ways to reduce overall firefighter stress is through the proper selection and use of protective footwear. As with all your other gear, make sure it's a good fit for both comfort and protection. The National Fire Protection Association requires protective boots to be heat, flame, and water resistant, corrosion resistant, puncture resistant, and resistant to electrical charges and conductivity. Finally, make sure the soles of your boots are designed to reduce slipping and that the footwear you select is designed to work properly with the rest of your gear. And these final two pieces, think of them in the same way you think of that nationally advertised credit card. Never leave your station without them. A properly fitted, properly working, self-contained breathing apparatus and a properly functioning and activated pass device could very well be your own personal rescuers and maybe your only hope of surviving a deadly environment. The well-dressed firefighter is a firefighter who is dressed for the occasion. It's no picnic. It's no joyride. It's answering the emergency call and expecting the unexpected. No call is routine.
Gear is cheap. Manpower is not. Personnel is expensive. Medical costs, families to deal with. It's very expensive. Gear is cheap in the overall scope of things.
Selecting the right gear is only a third of the considerations to keep in mind in order to maximize the protection that proper gear provides. This next item may seem obvious, and that is use. The very best gear doesn't do a bit of good hanging on the rack. You've got to use it.
Wear all of your personal protective gear at all times. You're not going to have time to react when something happens, when it hits the fan. You can always take it off. You can't put it on.
That old adage, use it or lose it, might apply to protective gear and your own life. There's very little difference between those who don't have protective gear and those who don't use their protective gear. It seems so basic. So what is it that stands in the way? Well, sometimes it's thoughtlessness. That unthinking waltz into situations without being focused on the potential danger. And that's a problem. But often it's more reckless than that. It comes from an attitude that says, it won't happen to me. Well, frankly, that kind of nonchalance in the face of an emergency call is just plain stupid.
If it could happen to me, it could happen to any firefighter in the United States. I consider myself a safe person, a knowledgeable person, and it happened to me. I got injured.
It's possible, though, that a lack of focus and a sense of nonchalance are not the only reasons for failing to wear the right gear. It may be that the gear doesn't fit right, is uncomfortable, or seems to hamper your movement. If your gear's not right, do something about it. Talk to your chief. If necessary, stir the waters a little. It'll be a whole lot easier for them to deal with your complaint than it will be for them to deal with your injury or death. 100,000 injuries every year, 100 deaths. You've got to insist that you don't want to be a statistic. So, when is it necessary to really gear up? When is it necessary to put on your SCBA, mask up, and activate your pass device? All the time. It's that simple. All the time. We will say it again and again. There's no such thing as a routine call. So never, ever enter a situation without giving yourself that final check.
We used to go into, numerous fires that I can recall. Your coat was open, you didn't have your gloves on, your boots were rolled down, you wanted to look cool. That's not accepted anymore. We try to be fully compliant all the time, even though sometimes you sound like your mother telling you, button your coat and put your hat on. It's something that we have to do. Everyone wants to go home after the Alarm is over.
The National Fire Protection Association requires that your turnout gear be thoroughly inspected and cleaned every 6 months. This should be considered a minimum requirement. Back at the station, make sure you follow the specific cleaning guidelines of the manufacturer and that of your department. But in general, use a mild detergent. Never use chlorine or bleach as the cleaning agent, and never dry the gear in direct sunlight, where UV rays can damage the fabric, reduce its flame retardancy, and shorten the time that it will provide effective protection. Clean all gear on a regular basis. If you're unsure of an exposure, do not wear the clothing until the agent or agents have been identified. Any gear contaminated by hazardous materials should be bagged and handled accordingly. Inspect all clothing after each use, looking for any breaks in Velcro, fastening hardware, seams, and stitching. Inspect all layers for exposure to heat, as indicated by brown spotting on the outer shell or black spots on the moisture barrier. You should also look for rips, tears, punctures, or abrasions to any fabric layer. If you find any problems at all, report them right away. And obviously, don't wear the clothing again until the repairs have been made. Clean, decontaminate, and dry the self-contained breathing apparatus after each use, and retest the entire system thoroughly prior to putting the unit back into service. Here's a final and very important point. Never store your gear wet, and even more important, never wear wet gear.
One of the factors that enhanced my injuries was wet gear. I had normal firefighter leather gloves that were wet, and one of the first things I did when this fire flashed was flip my gloves off, because my hands were the first spot where I felt the intense heat, and they turned to steam and burned my hands instantly. I personally never realized how important the drying of gear is until my injury, and that's one of the points that we're trying to bring out to the members and the firefighters across the country, is how important it is for wet gear. I never thought of it. I thought of it maybe as a housekeeping type thing. You don't want your gear to get moldy. You don't want the smell. You know, if you have a fire, it gets wet and sweaty a little bit, you want to rinse it out and wash it and keep it clean just so it's nicer for the next time you wear it. On a safety point of view, water turns to steam at a very low temperature. About 212 degrees, it turns to steam. We're dealing with fires that are 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 degrees at certain points in the room. Even at floor level, it's probably over the point where it's going to turn to steam.
Someday you may face an emergency that goes very wrong very quickly. The right gear can help even out the odds. Firefighting isn't like washing pots and pans or working in the garden or going swimming or welding or playing ball. When you're a firefighter, the way you dress can make the difference between life and death, between being a survivor and being a statistic. There's no such thing as a routine fire. You have to get in the habit of expecting the unexpected. Work smart, work safe, wear the right gear, and wear that right gear right. Do it for yourself and for the people who love you.
If it could happen to me, it could happen to any firefighter in the United States. I consider myself a safe person, a knowledgeable person, and it happened to me. I got injured.